Your home for our Atlanta Falcons, Hawks, and Atlanta United. Your teams play here. Sports Radio 92.9, The Game.
Let's say a good afternoon to Joe Patrick. He is our Falcons insider, covers the Atlanta Falcons for us here for Sports Radio 92.9, The Game. And, Joe, we were just talking about, what we wanted to see out of preseason game number 2, what we don't expect to get in preseason game number 3. But if Arthur Smith feels like the work is being put in, he's trusting his guys and feeling like, hey, I'm not going to put anybody in harm's way. Is that kind of the sentiment right now at Flowery Branch?
Yeah, absolutely it is. And I think that even extends into some of the portions of training camp, at least for some of the players. Like today, for example, we're told that Drew Dahlman and Chris Lindstrom are just dealing with some small stuff, and so they're not going to rush these guys. Obviously, they're not going to have them out there playing through stuff. So they're not in practice today, and we got a couple backups in. That gives the coaching staff some more reps to look at from some of these reserve offensive linemen who are fighting for spots. And that's basically what this week and this game is going to be about. Obviously, you're wanting everybody to improve, whether you're a starter or a reserve, but the reps that you want to give in this final preseason game are for the guys who you really want to get a good look at to see who's going to make your practice squad. And not just look at them and evaluate them, but what is the plan for them going forward in terms of a gap they may be able to fill if there is an injury to some of the starters at some point this season. So I think that's what we're looking forward to. And I think that for most of the starters, it's basically preparing now for Carolina, which I think everybody's pretty excited about.
Yeah, man, we've talked a lot about Matthew Bergeron from Syracuse, and because Hennessy was banged up, it seemed like everything kind of got ramped up for him. And at least from what I watched, I didn't see him do anything wrong on the preseason game against the Bengals, and certainly he looked good at practice. So I just feel, do you feel as strongly as we do that this offensive line will be the best in the NFC South or tied for the best?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I thought Matthew Bergeron had one of the most impressive outings from any player that was in that game, at least relative to what you expected them. And I think for Matthew Bergeron, plenty of us expect, for them to be some hiccups, and I'm sure there will be. It's not like he was perfect on every play in that game, but I can really only remember him getting straight up beaten one time, and it was clearly from a technical issue that he has talked about where and this gets kind of in the weeds with offensive line play, but when you're a tackle, you tend to punch higher and just play with your hands higher on the shoulder pads than you would at guard, and that's exactly how he got beat inside on a pass rush in the game Friday. But overall, he was fantastic, and I think that you really saw more than anything the kind of profile of offensive lineman he is and why he fits in this outside zone run. If you look at a lot of those zones that either with Bijan running or Tyler Algier, you would see Bergeron, running, sprinting kind of 15 yards, 20 yards side to side to, get a shoulder on a guy and whatnot. And I thought that he finishes blocks well. I just thought that in general, it was a big improvement over what this team had at that left guard spot last year. And I do tend to wonder, guys, if, for as good as this offensive line is, and as good as I think we expect it to be, I think what we consider its flaws or its vulnerabilities will be different than last year. And I tend to think that this team might be such a good run blocking unit. We might be more hyper-focusing later in the year on, for example, Caleb McGarry's pass protection or something like that. I don't think we're going to be really looking at that kind of center left guard area like we were last year, whether it was Drew Dahlman with the low snaps or, Elijah Wilkinson or whoever it was at left guard. I think that those areas are going to be a lot more shored up this coming year than they were last season.
I want to talk about the draft because, you're supposed to get a starter out of your first pick. That's a given, right? So that's Bijan, and we know what he's going to be. Matthew Bergeron, you just talked about him, starter. You get to Zach Harrison. That was our third-round pick. He will play. I don't know how much, snaps. But what about Clark Phillips and DeMarco Helms? Because these guys were 4th and 7th rounders, and they are going to, I think, Joe, play significant snaps this upcoming season. So now you're talking about 5 of your 6 rookies playing a lot for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, obviously the Falcons have got to be ecstatic with that production and what they've seen so far in this training camp and preseason. But, Clark Phillips, there was obviously the questions about his size coming out of the draft, and that's probably why he was a 4th-round pick and not a 2nd or borderline 1st, just kind of based on his technique and ability to play the ball alone. And he has basically shown in this training camp that has not really been a factor that has adversely affected him. There's maybe been a couple reps here and there where, Desmond Ridder or whoever is able to throw it to some of these bigger receivers that this team has and get one over him. But it's nothing that's crazy, he's giving up big plays and whatnot. If anything, he's making big plays. We saw him early in training camp making interceptions and showing off those ball skills that had teams valuing him so much as a player. So I think that will be very interesting. I think it will be interesting to see where he kind of winds up. Right now, he's kind of rotating in as like the second nickel back. And it just depends on who's available for practice and whatnot. But I'm interested to see if they might play him at all on the outside. Obviously, this team has some other corners who have experience out there. But if you don't have Jeff Okudah, maybe for 1 or 2 or 3 games, I will be interested to see if he gets any reps on the outside. Because if he's not facing a big size mismatch, I don't see why he wouldn't be able to do that, but I think he will play a lot. And, the other guy, DeMarco Hellams that you mentioned, I mean, he's just been so impressive because what we heard out of him coming out of the draft was he was a big-time tackler, all that stuff, has a nose for the ball, but can overplay things in coverage, not so great. And what he's done in these first 2 preseason games is coming down with a couple interceptions. And I think that's exactly the kind of style of defense that Ryan Nielsen wants to implement here. He wants to implement a defense that is kind of proactive on the front foot, making other teams react to them. And part of that has to do with, rushing the passer or whatnot, but also you want have those ball-hawking secondary players. And so when we talk about this team playing in nickel and dime situations, maybe you rotate DeMarco Hellams in there or Jalen Hopkins or some of these other safeties and get 3 safeties on the field. There's a lot of weapons that these defensive coaches have, and it's a testament to the coaches, Steve Jackson, the defensive backs coach, Gary Gray, the assistant head coach, that have gotten these guys ready to this point. And I think that, Ryan Nielsen's just got to be licking his lips at all the different kinds of things he can throw at opposing offenses.
It's our man, Smoking Joe Patrick, talking about the Falcons here on Dukes and Bell on the WadeFord.com hotline. Linebacker core, we like Caden Ellis, Troy Anderson. What do you think? Ebiketie and Troy Anderson's second camp and second preseason, how they looking?
Yeah, I think they're looking better. I was specifically focused in on Troy Anderson. By the way, I don't really focus on Caden Ellis because I already kind of see him as a pretty, premier linebacker in this league. I know he doesn't have a lot of experience, but just when you look at him, he is kind of everything you want in that kind of veteran leader linebacker who also has the skill and athleticism to run around the field and make plays. I think where the linebacker position really kind of hinges is on Troy Anderson. Can he elevate himself from where he was last year? Where last year, again, we saw him making plays. We saw him blocking punts on special teams, chasing guys down. Obviously has tremendous athletic gifts, but I think especially early in the season, you would see teams really running the ball right at him. And I thought the run defense was weak, to be frank. But I think that he has improved there. It's something that, he was better in my opinion, in just that one series that he got against the Bengals. And so I think it's definitely something to watch out for. I can't say I can make a prediction that he's going to be amazing or going to be terrible, but I think that is kind of where a lot of the success of this defense is going to hinge is on how effective Troy Anderson can be in that linebacker position. He doesn't have a lot of experience there. I think a lot of people forget that he's only been playing the position for a few years. So on one hand, you could say, oh, well, it's going to be bad because he doesn't have that experience. But on the other hand, you could say there's so much room for him to grow and get better because of how much he still has to learn.
How do you feel about Ritter?
I feel good, I feel good, and I feel like I'm actually lower on his performance than a lot of people I've seen talking coming out of that Bengals game. I was actually pleased with the drive, even though it ended in the interception. You want to score, of course. But I think that what we saw on that drive was kind of a beautiful kind of encapsulation of what this Falcons offense is going to be and why Desmond Ridder can be effective in this system, because he wasn't perfectly accurate, right? Like he threw a couple balls behind guys, but you've got amazing playmakers like Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson and Drake London who can make amazing plays on the ball and turn, average throws into still very productive passes, possessions, eventually for the Falcons. So I think that while he wasn't perfect, you saw so much of why this coaching staff has thought that he was going to be at least enough for this team to carry them forward and for them to utilize some of the resources that they may have otherwise allocated at the quarterback position and spread them around the team. And I think that what you just see is a really kind of fleshed out team. Like if you invest resources in the quarterback over Desmond Ridder, maybe you don't bring in Calais Campbell or Jesse Bates or any of these guys. So I think that, it all just kind of adds up to what should be a really nice haul for the Falcons this year.
And before we cut you loose, the wide receiver group, the people that were reviewing the Falcons nationally, not knowing that or don't take the time to know that Bijan will be used as a wide receiver and that Cordero Patterson can do that. And we've got tight ends like Pitts who function like wide receivers. But I really like Mac Hollins. We liked him from the jump. Yeah. Aside from his idiosyncrasies, and there are many, but he's a dude. And then we talked about, that dude is fast. We're talking about a dude in Scotty Miller. You see it every time. Almost got a touchdown the other night in the preseason game. How does it look? As far as cuts, who's going to get cut at wide receiver? Josh Ali's popped a few times in the preseason as well.
Yeah, it's so tough. I think if I had to say anybody right now, I would say Zay Malone makes it just because of what he offers on special teams. But really, it's anybody's guess. It could be Josh Ali, could be any of these guys, really. It's been a really heated competition. But I think that, something that you identified there, Mike, and I think that it's something that doesn't just exist at the wide receiver position, but it is clearly evident there is, across the roster, this front office has assembled an array of different types of players. And you could even talk about a guy like JJ Arcega-Whiteside, who probably is not going to make the team, but he presents a different option for them to look at, whether that's, a wide receiver that's built like a tight end or a Scotty Miller who can, blow teams out of the water with his speed. And obviously at the receiver position, you want some of that. But even if you look at in the defensive backfield, you've got, everybody from Trey Flowers to Clark Phillips kind of, that can line up for you at corner, guys who offer something different so that these coaches can pick and choose who's going to be the best options in certain situations and certain matchups. And again, I think that's what makes this team so difficult to prepare for and play against. But yeah, I thought Matt Collins really showed out, and I think that he's clearly been a guy who I think a lot of people are sleeping on. Obviously, he's been in the media for some of his personal quirkery, but I think he's going to offer a lot on the field to this team for sure.
Last thing for me, are we going to see Mayfield cut this year?
I think so. I would be shocked if there aren't one or two players that go into the game week for the Falcons against Carolina who aren't currently here, that players that they pick up as free agents. And I think that an offensive lineman, a swing tackle, is probably very high on that list, potentially also a linebacker. But I personally have not seen enough from Jalen Mayfield. They could keep him around on the practice squad, but I would be very worried. And I think that there certainly have to be better options for this team out there around the league. Again, when guys start getting cut and there's more players available on the market for them to pick from than what we've seen from Jalen Mayfield. I think he's had his moments this training camp. I just don't think the consistency has been there for him to be relied upon in such an important position as a swing tackle.
I think we agree on that. We'll wait to see what the coaching staff thinks. Joe Patrick, great job. Again, he covers the Falcons for us. Follow him and make sure you stay up on everything that's going on with the Falcons. Appreciate the time again today, Joe.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.